My pleasure to be here, and I recognize this gathering, although I've never been to anything Humanity Plus before, because it's very clear to me that it's yet another human utopian effort. And as a utopian science fiction writer, I feel that we are at least fellow travelers. I want to talk about that, and as far as I can tell, and basically make a commentary from as an outsider to this particular movement, which I would regard as a kind of utopian technological futurist movement. And I must say that ignorant as I was, I've been really reassured to see the talks that came before mine, James's and David's and David Brin's, because it helps to orient me to what is really going on rather than just my previous impression, which was so fragmentary. And what I like about what I've learned so far this morning is how grounded in, I have to say, political the talks have been so far, focused not on the incredibly powerful unleashing of human potentiality that comes through various technological advancements that we might make, but also the problem of integrating them into history as we have it right now, the moment, and how we go forward, so that it becomes not just science fiction turned into a kind of a hucksterism or prophecy, this will happen, when it's not at all clear that it will happen, but that it could happen. And if we were to organize society right in our efforts in the next centuries, that what could happen could be quite extraordinary. So this emphasis on technology that I sense from this movement is both good and bad. The good part of it is that it necessarily includes an emphasis on science. And this is profoundly reassuring and good thing, because really science is the method that we have invented as a culture to alleviate human suffering to the extent possible, and also to gain a little bit more control over our natural environment, to make life not only more comfortable, but also get to that moment of self-actualization. And I think it's really important, maybe I should bring it up now, this Abraham Maslow's definition of the hierarchy of needs, that you need a material basis of prosperity before you can get to the next steps of self-actualization. So that's the good part of focusing on technology. And then the bad part is to skip the hard parts and to begin to make leaps of faith that leap across scales of magnitude that can turn science into scientism, into a kind of pseudoscience or a boosterism. And there are two problems here. One of them is simply that some of these things are going to remain physically impossible for us as a species to do, and so they shade off into that part of science fiction that you would call science fantasy or power fantasy. Very common thing for science fiction in general, which is often a literature of the young and ambitious and hopeful. But also, it can be, the other danger is that we forget that it has to be a total social project, that it's integrated with everything else that we do on the planet, including surviving on it. So once again, the hierarchy of needs and desires comes into play here, and until we've managed to satisfy the material needs of the species and the long-term sustainability on this planet, we can't do all of the greater things that might then come after. And so I need to point out something that I think many of you know already, that technology is profoundly political. That when we talk about technology and we look at its utopian elements, we really are also talking about a system of politics. And it is okay to talk about it on a political level. At first it seems kind of horrible, oh no, we're caught in politics again. But it's always best to be reminded that we are in a political system that values some things over another, and then make use of that to move forward. So we have this definition of technology then needs to broaden, so that technology is really a name for how we manipulate the environment, and there's software as well as hardware. So it isn't just machinery, it's also social systems. So that language, for instance, is a technology, and law is a technology, and laws determine our economic systems. And so therefore also justice is a technology. So there's a technology called justice where everybody on the planet gets an equal share of the fruits of human effort. Now, it's true what Bill Gibbs said metaphorically. The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. But what's really true is that justice is already here, but it is not evenly distributed on the planet. And so the Humanity Plus movement can, if it doesn't acknowledge this and say from the start and as part of every context of every talk that this has to be for everybody on the planet, it becomes detached and can look like what I saw very often in my Mars years. The Mars Project looks like an effort to detach and escape from humanity's problems by starting a new culture that does better. And this kind of escapism is crippling to any movement that wants to do mass support or to change humanity in a better direction. It has to always be a total movement, and this is why it was so beautiful to see, looking backward from the year 2000, the cover in James's talk, because this novel by Edward Bellamy was indeed transformative in the sense that the progressive political movement of the turn of the last century came out of that book. And so a utopian novel can indeed change the world because the progressive movement changed American politics and American reality. Also H.G. Wells, another beautiful reference, because in his persistent attempt to tell utopian social futures, which were not his bestsellers, but were indeed often ignored, but he kept doing it. What he did was create the mindset for the bureaucrats and the people in power in the post-war period, so that in 1945, when they had to reconstruct the social order of the world at Bretton Woods and elsewhere in the UN building, they were using H.G. Wells's utopian model of a social meritocracy that was scientific-based, that was reality-based, to create what they thought would be a working reconstruction of civilization, which had to be done at the end of World War II. So once again, utopian science fiction, enormous impact on the real, the social safety net, the meritocracy of a technocracy rather than nepotism. These things are first science fiction ideas, and then they're enacted in the real world. So this is a great model, I think, for your group to follow. And so, that being the case, I want to register my discomfort and dislike of these various terms where humanism is turned into transhumanism or posthumanism or humanity plus. And the reason I don't like it is that there's a couple of ways this cuts. We became transhuman at the same time that we became human, in that technology always been with us. So especially writing, which is truly a consciousness-changing technology that has enabled us to do everything that we do in modern civilization, that's the moment of transhumanism. So that's 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And yet, on the other hand, you could also say that we aren't even yet human, that essentially we're in a subhumanism, that it would be nice if we could become human, and that all 7 billion of us on the planet are living in adequacy. So this is I don't want to get caught up, when a science fiction writer begins to critique a futurist movement, this is what I think probably a prime example of what Freud labeled the narcissism of small differences. And so I don't want to spend too much time there, because really we are on the same page. But in terms of public relations, I think giving yourself a name that tends to separate out from the bulk of humanity will result in an initial misunderstanding and a resistance to the good message that you have. So I don't know what the better name would be. Humanity first, humanism, existentialism, I mean, these are older names. Adequacy, all people better, these are dumb names, and I can see how in the media landscape you would want a better name than that. But I charge you with this task, that you quit talking about transhumanism, because we are never going to be transhuman. We are always just going to be human. Now, that being said, I have to say I believe fully in that we are cyborgs already. So cyborg is a different term, where the human and the machine in an interface together created by humans becomes the cyborg. We're already cyborgs, okay? And it's only going to get more machine-like in our interactions with the human and the machine. But that being said, still within that, we are still just human beings. We are never transcendent in the sense that the word trans, and we are never post in the sense that post. And the sense of humanity plus, well, humanity plus, but it has to be maybe humanities, or it has to maybe be all people, or it has to be 7 billion plus, or some term that immediately says it has to be for everybody. It can't just be for an escape hatch, bolt hole, off to Mars crew of affluent Westerners. So, that point being made, I want to get back away from the narcissism of small differences, because basically I am so much in favor of the idea of imagining how good it could be if we got things right, and also the reliance on science as the working method. So I want to suggest to you that there's never going to be any such thing as artificial intelligence in the way that it's been portrayed in science fiction, nor is there going to be a singularity. That the singularity maybe happened in 2008, that artificial intelligence is a name that we have for science, for the scientific method. It's already existed since the early 17th century, artificial intelligence. And this is why you can ask artificial intelligence, well, what makes best human health? And artificial intelligence replies to you, well, if 100% of the population were to drop their medical numbers in this particular way, then 5 of them will not get heart attacks that they might have had otherwise. We don't know which 5. We can never know. The whole population needs to do this for it to work for those 5 people that will never know. And this is not normal human thinking. This is not the causal if-then thinking that we ourselves in our individual minds come up with. It's more of a construct that we've made. The scientific method, the clinical test, the double-blind study, that's artificial intelligence. And these computers that so much mental energy has gone into imagining to being conscious have misunderstood the brain as well as computers. Because essentially the brain, although we are understanding it better and better, we are understanding it either when it's dead and we've autopsied it, or we understand it when it's alive by indirect means of seeing where blood flow goes, to seeing where electrical activity is happening. And these are magnitudes larger activities than what is really happening to create consciousness. And we can't, we can reduce that so that maybe it's only 5 magnitudes smaller where things are happening rather than 8 magnitudes smaller. But we can never get down to the grain of living human thought. And when we don't know how consciousness works in the brain, we can't model it, we can't reproduce it, especially with something as simple as binary computers. So we will have tremendously fast computers, and we already do. We have peculiar, strange activities going on, but the idea that they are going to coalesce, or as David, one of his scenarios, which is a very interesting scenario, of course, that the computers will develop sentience and therefore will, consciousness, intention. All of this is to misunderstand the situation. The intention, the will, is always in us, in our hands, collectively and socially. The tools are going to get more and more complicated. The tools will even get to the point where nobody understands them in full. For instance, the global financial fast trading system. The crash of 2008 that nobody really fully understands. Maybe that was the singularity. Maybe that was the moment when something that nobody created and nobody understood, nevertheless, is running the economic system that controls everybody's lives on the planet. Well, it's a good metaphor. It's actually interesting for a way to go forward and to perhaps investigate how can we take better control of our systems. But it's still systems analysis done by humans and with some machine aid. So I guess what I would say is that your movement, Humanity Plus, is like an advocacy for science. Already that's great. And it's an advocacy to science, because scientists need to know what to work on. And so this is where the visionary aspect of people saying, well, we want this. We want longevity. This is the most obvious and main placed focus, which is why I think, along with everybody here, is going to be really interested to hear Aubrey de Grey talk later today. Longevity is an interesting thing to explore, and that's really what medicine has been doing all along. So this is advocacy to the medical and to the scientific community. Please work harder on this. Please work less on military developments. So it becomes a kind of a peace effort and an advocacy for the life sciences as being the most important sciences, where we can make enormous gains in human goodness and maybe do it for everybody on the planet. So I would say this is the the truly best part, the advocacy for science and the advocacy to science for a particular line of research and development. And thank you. Okay. I've been timely, and so there is a little time for questions, if you have any.
Let's use the mic. Hold on just a minute. Thank you very much. It should be working.
It's working. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, are you familiar
No,
with
I'm
that?
not.
Okay. It stated that in animals, there can be, consciousness can emerge from different types of neural patterns. So in that case, what we call multiple realizability, it might actually be true. So we might actually have the internet or a computer become conscious. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think that consciousness is hardwired into the universe, or is it an emergent property of the universe?
Well, I speak instinctively, really, here as an English major and not an expert on these matters, but I have been reading about them. And my impression is that consciousness is an emergent property from a complex system that evolved, and that it evolved from pre-conscious, but then these words are a little fuzzy, and that's where you can do literary analysis and begin to realize that you can give something useful to the conversation. Consciousness, sentience, these to me are slightly different, and I think that animals have consciousness, birds have consciousness, and really, in the Buddhist sense, all sentient beings, that includes life, really, that bacteria probably have consciousness of a sort. So yes, an emergent property of the complexity of the universe, and there's all kinds of consciousnesses, but what I'm saying is that our computers are not, at this point, adequate to the creation of consciousness because we don't have a good model of it. And that, I think, is the main problem, is although we have very rapid machines, we don't have a model. And the Minsky model, the society of the mind, is the most simplistic kind of a thing. It's just the first stab. It's sort of a Renaissance stab. The way that Freud or Jung would say, well, the mind seems to work like this, and Minsky is not doing anything differently. So we still have such a primitive sense of what consciousness is. And I'm saying that because of the minute, fine-grained nature of the brain, it might stay that primitive for a really long time, in which case we can't reproduce it.
Yes, Keith.
And there's something that you may be interested in later today. There's an actual proposal out now which looks like it's possible to happen, where humans would have a large enough presence in space to mount an enormous mission to Mars. I mean, we're talking essentially tens of tons per hour to the Martian surface.
Well, as you know, I've been interested in Mars for a long time, and I wonder about the payload problems of getting out of the gravity well, and
What I'll be talking about.
And if it's a space elevator or some other method that gets us great weights out of the gravity well, then that would just open the door to quite an amazing piece of real estate. So that would be a lovely thing.
Thank you. It's break time now. Please feel free to come up and speak to Stan, or go out and have coffee, and we'll see you back in, I think it's 10 minutes. So thank you so much, Stan. Excellent talk.